What if I told you that some of the most valuable Jefferson nickels in America are hiding in plain sight right now? Not gold coins, not silver dollars, just ordinary nickels that millions of people have spent without a second thought. From the Great Depression to the dawn of the space age, these coins traveled through American history, carrying secrets that most people never noticed. Hidden mint marks, rare full steps, double dies, and errors worth hundreds, even thousands of dollars. Today, we're counting down 10 Jefferson nickels from 1939 to 1959 that every collector should check before spending. And trust me, the final coin on this list may be sitting in your pocket right now, waiting to be discovered. So grab your magnifying glass, because this treasure hunt starts now. Welcome back to Old Coin Empire. Welcome back to Old Coin Empire. What if the nickel sitting forgotten in an old coffee can, buried inside a desk drawer, or mixed in a jar of loose change is actually worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars? Most people never look twice at a Jefferson nickel. They see 5 cents, nothing more. But collectors know a secret. Some Jefferson nickels hide stories, varieties, and minting mistakes that can turn an ordinary coin into a genuine treasure. And today's first coin is one of the most important examples. Because in 1939, something happened that still excites collectors more than 85 years later. So before you spend another nickel, take a close look. The coin we're talking about today is the 1939 Jefferson nickel. And trust me, you'll want to hear the story. 1939 Jefferson nickel. Imagine America in 1939. The Great Depression was slowly fading into history. Families were still careful with money. Every nickel mattered. Every penny had value. Meanwhile, the Jefferson nickel was still the new kid on the block. The design had only debuted a year before, replacing the Buffalo nickel that Americans had carried for decades. Many people hated change. Some missed the Buffalo nickel. Others loved the fresh new design featuring Thomas Jefferson on the front and his famous home, Monticello, on the back. Nobody could have known that collectors decades later would become obsessed with one particular year. At first glance, a 1939 Jefferson nickel looks completely ordinary. That's exactly what makes it dangerous. Because some of the most valuable coins are the ones that don't look valuable at all. And this is where the treasure hunt begins. If you have a 1939 nickel, the first thing you need to do is flip it over. Look carefully. Do you see a mint mark? A small D for Denver? An S for San Francisco? Or no mint mark at all, meaning Philadelphia? That tiny letter can completely change the story of your coin. Most people never check. Collectors always do. But here's where things get interesting. The 1939 Jefferson nickel is famous for one of the most desirable varieties in the entire series. Collectors call the reverse of 1940 variety. Now that might sound complicated, but think of it this way. The U.S. Mint modified the reverse design after 1939. Some 1939 nickels ended up being struck with the newer reverse style. That created a variety. And collectors love varieties. Why? Because they tell a story. They reveal a moment when something changed at the mint. A moment frozen forever in metal. Today, many collectors actively search through old nickel collections, hoping to find one. And when they do, prices can climb dramatically higher than ordinary examples. But we're only getting started, because the real excitement comes from errors. Errors are the hidden treasure of coin collecting. They're mistakes that escape the mint. Mistakes that somehow survived. Mistakes that shouldn't exist. And the 1939 Jefferson nickel has several. Take out a magnifying glass. Now look carefully at the lettering. Look at the words. Liberty. In God we trust. Monticello. 5 cents. Are the letters sharp, or do you see shadows? Extra thickness? A second image hiding underneath? If you do, you may have discovered doubling. And doubling is one of the first things experienced collectors look for, because certain double dies can command impressive premiums. A nickel worth only a few dollars can suddenly become worth hundreds. Imagine finding that in a coin jar your family hasn't touched for decades. That's what makes coin collecting exciting. You never know what you're about to discover. But then comes a feature that separates ordinary nickels from elite nickels. Full steps. If you spend any time around serious Jefferson nickel collectors, you've heard those words, full steps, and they matter a lot. Look at Monticello on the reverse. At the base of the building are steps. Most nickels lost those details because of weak strikes or circulation wear, but some survive with every step clearly visible. Collectors call these full steps examples. And when a 1939 nickel has full steps, everything changes. Suddenly, collectors start paying attention. Auction houses start paying attention. Investors start paying attention. Because high-grade full steps examples are genuinely difficult to find. And rarity creates demand. Demand creates competition. Competition creates value. That's why some exceptional 1939 Jefferson nickels have sold for thousands of dollars at auction. Not because they're made of gold, not because they're ancient, but because they're rare in the condition collectors want most. Now, here's something many people never think about. Every year, the number of surviving high-grade examples gets smaller. Coins get damaged, lost, scratched, cleaned, spent, destroyed, but no new 1939 nickels are being made. The supply never increases. It only decreases. And that's exactly why collectors continue hunting them. In fact, many experienced treasure hunters search through estate sales, inherited collections, and old coin jars specifically looking for early Jefferson nickels. They know what most people don't. They know hidden value often disguises itself as ordinary pocket change. So if you own a 1939 Jefferson nickel, don't just glance at the date. Study it. Check the mint mark. Inspect the lettering. Search for doubling. Examine the reverse. Look at the steps. Because one small detail could completely transform what you thought was just a 5-cent coin. And here's the crazy part. The next coin on our list may be even more surprising. Because while collectors chase the 1939 for its famous varieties, the 1940 Jefferson nickel quietly built a reputation of its own. And hidden inside that year is a secret that most people never discover until it's too late. To be continued in part 2. If you thought the 1939 Jefferson nickel was impressive, wait until you see what happened next. Because the next coin is one that millions of Americans have handled without ever realizing what they were holding. Most people see an old nickel and assume age is the only thing that matters. Collectors know better. Sometimes the biggest treasures hide inside the most ordinary-looking coins. And the 1940 Jefferson nickel proves exactly that. 1940 Jefferson nickel. Picture America in 1940. The country was recovering from the hardships of the Great Depression. Factories were growing. Businesses were reopening. People were hopeful again. Yet overseas, the world was becoming increasingly dangerous. War had already erupted across Europe. And although America had not yet entered the conflict, change was coming. During this uncertain period, the United States Mint continued producing Jefferson nickels by the millions. Nobody saved them. Nobody imagined they would one day become collectors' items. People spent them on newspapers, groceries, candy bars, and train tickets. They circulated from hand to hand without anyone giving them a second thought. That is exactly why finding exceptional examples today can be surprisingly difficult. And that is where your treasure hunt begins. The first thing you should do when examining a 1940 Jefferson nickel is check the mint mark. Flip the coin over. Look carefully near Monticello. Do you see a tiny D, a tiny S, or no mint mark at all? That small detail tells you where the coin was born. Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco. Each mint produced different quantities, and collectors pay close attention to those differences. But here's what many people don't understand. The real value often isn't in the date alone. It's in the condition. Imagine two identical 1940 nickels. One spent decades in circulation. Its details are worn. The surfaces are dull. The steps on Monticello have nearly disappeared. The second coin spent decades protected in a collection. Its original luster still shines. Its details remain sharp. Every line is visible. To most people, they're both nickels. To collectors, they're worlds apart. The difference can mean hundreds or even thousands of dollars. That's why experienced collectors never judge a coin too quickly. They study every detail. And one detail matters more than almost any other. the full steps designation. If you've never heard of full steps before, remember this term, because it could be the difference between an ordinary coin and an extraordinary one. Look closely at the steps beneath Monticello. Most 1940 nickels show weak or incomplete steps due to strike quality and circulation wear. But occasionally, a coin survives with all the steps clearly visible. Collectors call these full steps examples. And when they find one, the competition begins. Some high-grade full steps nickels have sold for remarkable amounts because they are so difficult to locate. Every collector building a top-quality Jefferson nickel set wants them. The problem? There aren't enough to go around. And whenever demand exceeds supply, prices climb. But full steps are only the beginning, because the real excitement starts when errors enter the picture. Errors are the hidden treasures of the coin world. They're accidental, unexpected, and often extremely valuable. Take out a magnifying glass. Now inspect the lettering. Look carefully at Liberty. Look at I In God We Trust. Look at the date. Do any of the letters appear doubled? Do you see shadows, extra thickness, unusual spreading? If so, you could be looking at a double die variety. Many people miss these signs completely. They spend valuable coins without realizing it. Collectors don't make that mistake. They know that small details create big opportunities. Then there are die cracks. These occur when the die used to strike coins begins breaking down. Tiny fractures form in the steel. Every coin struck afterward carries evidence of that damage. Under magnification, these cracks often appear as raised lines running across the design. Some collectors actively search for them. Why? Because they represent a specific moment in mint history. A moment when a worn die continued producing coins before finally being replaced. Each crack tells a story, and every story has value. But there's another reason collectors love the 1940 Jefferson nickel. Survival. Think about how many nickels were produced. Millions upon millions. Now think about how many survived untouched for more than 80 years. The number becomes much smaller. Every year, more are damaged, more are lost, more are cleaned improperly, more disappear forever. The supply keeps shrinking. Yet collector demand remains strong. That's a powerful combination. And it explains why serious collectors continue searching old collections, coin albums, estate sales, and forgotten jars. Because they know something valuable could still be hiding there. Imagine opening an old family collection. You notice a worn envelope marked Old Nickels. Inside sits a 1940 Jefferson nickel. Most people would ignore it. A collector would immediately start checking. Mint mark, condition, full steps, doubling, die cracks. Every detail matters. And sometimes those details reveal something extraordinary. That is what makes coin collecting addictive. You never know when an ordinary coin will become a major discovery. You never know when 5 cents becomes $50, or 500, or even more. But if you think the 1940 Jefferson nickel is exciting, wait until you hear the story of the next coin. Because the year 1941 marked the final chapter before America entered World War II. And hidden within those nickels are clues from one of the most important moments in American history. The 1941 Jefferson nickel is next, and its secrets may surprise you. To be continued in Part 3. Before the United States entered World War II, millions of Jefferson nickels were already moving through American pockets. Nobody knew how much the world was about to change. Nobody knew that within months, America will be pulled into one of the most important conflicts in human history. And that is exactly why the 1941 Jefferson nickel captures the attention of collectors today. It isn't just a coin. It's a time capsule, a piece of history frozen in metal. And if you have one sitting in a coin jar right now, you may want to take a closer look. Because hidden among ordinary 1,941 nickels are varieties, errors, and high-grade survivors that collectors eagerly search for. Let's dive into the story. 1941 Jefferson nickel. Imagine holding a nickel in early 1941. America was still at peace. Families were working. Children were attending school. Businesses were growing. Life seemed relatively normal. But everything was about to change. By the end of that same year, The attack on Pearl Harbor would shock the nation and pull the United States into World War II. That historical connection alone makes the 1941 Jefferson nickel special. Collectors love coins that witness major moments in history, and few coins can claim to have circulated during such a dramatic turning point. But history is only the beginning. The real excitement starts when collectors begin examining the coin itself. At first glance, a 1941 Jefferson nickel looks ordinary. Jefferson's portrait appears on the front. Monticello appears on the reverse. Nothing seems unusual. That's exactly why many valuable examples survive unnoticed. Most people never look beyond the date. Collectors always do. The first thing you should check is the mint mark. Turn the coin over. Look near Monticello. Do you see a D, an S, or no mint mark at all? That tiny letter immediately tells part of the coin story. Philadelphia struck enormous numbers of nickels. Denver and San Francisco struck their own versions as well. Each mint created slightly different collecting opportunities. And sometimes those differences can become extremely important. Now comes the part that separates casual observers from serious treasure hunters. Condition. If you watched Old Coin Empire before, you've heard me say it. Condition changes everything. A heavily worn 1941 nickel might be worth only a modest premium, but an untouched example with strong original luster? That's a different story entirely. Collectors spend years searching for exceptional survivors. Why? Because most nickels were used exactly as intended. They circulated. They were spent, dropped, scratched, damaged, and eventually worn down. The coins that escaped that fate became increasingly rare, and rarity creates demand. Imagine finding a coin that looks almost exactly as it did when it left the mint more than 80 years ago. That is the type of coin collectors dream about. But there's one feature that creates even more excitement. Full steps. Those two words can make collectors' hearts race. Look carefully at the steps beneath Monticello. Can you see every line clearly? Are the steps complete and uninterrupted? If they are, you may be holding a full steps example. Most 1941 nickels do not qualify. Weak strikes in circulation will usually remove those details. That's why collectors pay such close attention to them. The difference between an ordinary coin and a full steps coin can be dramatic. In some cases, values increase substantially. And when a full steps coin is also in high grade, competition among collectors can become intense. But that's not where the story ends. Because some of the most exciting discoveries involve minting errors. Errors are the accidental treasures of the coin world. They were never supposed to exist, yet somehow they escaped into circulation. And collectors love them. Take a magnifying glass and inspect your 1941 nickel carefully. Look at the date. Look at Liberty. Look at I In God We Trust. Do any letters appear doubled? Do you see extra thickness? A shadow? A second image? These could be signs of a double die variety. Many double dies are subtle. They're easy to miss, which is exactly why valuable examples continue appearing in collections today. People overlook them. Collectors don't. And sometimes those tiny differences can add significant value. Then there are die cracks. These fascinating mint-made flaws occur when the steel die begins to fracture after striking thousands of coins. The crack transfers onto every coin struck afterward, under magnification. They often appear as raised lines crossing the design. Some collectors actively search for them because each crack tells a story about the life of the die, a story of wear, pressure, and eventually failure. The closer a die came to breaking apart, the more dramatic the resulting errors could become, and dramatic errors often attract strong collector demand. Now imagine this scenario. You're sorting through a box of old family coins. Most appear ordinary. Then you find a 1941 Jefferson nickel. You inspect it carefully. Strong luster, sharp details, clear full steps, maybe even a double die. Suddenly, that forgotten nickel becomes a star collection. That's exactly why experienced collectors never rush. They know treasures often hide in plain sight. And the 1941 Jefferson nickel proves it. Millions were produced. Millions circulated. Yet only a tiny fraction survived in exceptional condition. And every year, that number grows smaller. Coins get lost, damaged, cleaned, destroyed. The best examples become harder and harder to find. That's why collectors continue searching. Because the next discovery could be waiting in a jar, drawer, or inherited collection right now. But here's where the story becomes even more fascinating. The next coin on our list comes after World War II ended. America was rebuilding. Soldiers were returning home. The country was entering a completely new era. And the 1946 Jefferson nickel carries the story of that transformation, a story that every collector should know. To be continued in Part 4. Welcome back to Old Coin Empire. The war was finally over. For years, American families had endured rationing, uncertainty, and sacrifice. Millions of soldiers returned home. Factories that once produced tanks and aircraft began making cars and household goods again. America was changing. And right in the middle of that transformation, a small 5-cent coin entered circulation. Most people spent it without a second thought. Today, collectors see something completely different. They see history. They see opportunity. And sometimes, they see a hidden treasure worth far more than 5 cents. This is the story of the 1946 Jefferson nickel. 1946 Jefferson nickel. Imagine receiving change at a grocery store in 1946. Among the coins in your hand sits a brand new Jefferson nickel, fresh from the mint, bright, sharp, untouched. Nobody could have imagined that decades later collectors would be hunting those same nickels. But that's exactly what's happening today. The 1946 Jefferson nickel holds a special place in American coin history because it marked a return to normal nickel production after World War II. During the war, special silver alloy nickels had been produced to conserve strategic metals. But in 1946, the mint returned to the traditional composition. That alone makes this coin important. It represents a nation moving forward after one of the most difficult periods in its history. Collectors love coins connected to important events. And few events shaped America more than World War II. But historical significance is only the beginning. Because hidden among ordinary 1,946 nickels are examples that collectors are willing to pay serious money for. The first thing you should do is examine the mint mark. Flip the coin over. Look carefully near Monticello. Do you see a D for Denver? An S for San Francisco? Or no mint mark from Philadelphia? That tiny letter immediately affects collector interest. Some mintages are scarcer than others. Some are more difficult to find in high grades. And some varieties exist that many people never notice. Now, let's talk about condition. Because condition is where things become exciting. Millions of 1946 nickels circulated heavily. People spend them every day. As a result, most surviving examples show wear. The sharp details are gone. The luster has faded. The surfaces have been scratched and damaged over decades of use. But every once in a while, a collector discovers something different. A coin that somehow escaped circulation. A coin that remained untouched. A coin that still looks almost exactly as it did when it left the mint. And when that happens, collectors pay attention, very close attention, because high-grade examples become increasingly difficult to find with every passing year. Now comes the feature that serious Jefferson nickel collectors obsess over. Full steps. If you've been following this series, you already know how important those words are. Look carefully at Monticello. Focus on the steps beneath the building. Can you see them clearly? Are they complete? Unbroken? Sharp? If so, you may have something special. Most 1946 nickels don't display perfect full steps. Weak strikes in circulation will usually eliminate those details. That's why collectors compete so aggressively for examples that do. A high-grade full steps 1946 nickel can command impressive premiums compared to ordinary examples. And sometimes those premiums become surprisingly large. But we're not finished, because the most exciting discoveries often involve mint errors. And the 1946 Jefferson nickel has its share. Take a magnifying glass. Look carefully at the lettering. Study Liberty. Study the date. Study I in God we trust. Do you notice doubling? Extra thickness? Shadows around the letters? These signs could indicate a double die variety, Many people overlook double dies because they expect dramatic doubling. In reality, some varieties are subtle. You have to look carefully. But finding one can completely change the value of the coin. Then there are repunch mint marks. Years ago, mint marks were applied separately to the working dies. Sometimes a mint mark was punched more than once. If the punches didn't align perfectly, a second image could appear. Collectors love these varieties because they reveal the human side of coin production. Tiny mistakes, tiny differences, big value, and then come die cracks. Some collectors actively search for them. A die crack occurs when the steel die begins to fracture after striking thousands upon thousands of coins. The crack transfers onto every coin struck afterward. These raised lines can sometimes stretch dramatically across the coin surface. They tell a story of a die nearing the end of its life, a story frozen forever in metal. Now imagine finding a 1946 nickel with strong, full steps, beautiful luster, and a collectible variety. That ordinary-looking nickel suddenly becomes something extraordinary. And that's what makes coin collecting so exciting. You never know when a common coin will reveal an uncommon secret. Every old collection becomes a treasure hunt. Every coin jar becomes a mystery. Every inherited box of coins becomes an opportunity. And the 1946 Jefferson nickel proves that perfectly. Most were spent. Most were worn down. Most disappeared into history. But the best examples survived. And collectors continue searching for them every day. Because hidden among millions of ordinary nickels are a few remarkable survivors. And those survivors are becoming harder to find every year. But if you think the 1946 Jefferson nickel is fascinating, wait until you hear about the next coin. Because the 1947 Jefferson nickel teaches one of the most important lessons in all of coin collecting. A lesson that has turned forgotten pocket change into valuable treasures time and time again. And once you learn it, you'll never look at an old nickel the same way again. To be continued in Part 5. What if I told you that one of the most overlooked Jefferson nickels ever made could be hiding inside an old coin jar right now? Not because it's rare, not because it's made of silver, not because it looks unusual, but because most people never take the time to check the one thing that matters most. Condition. The next coin on our list proves that a common date can sometimes become an extraordinary treasure. And once you understand why collectors love this coin, you'll never look at old nickels the same way again. Let's talk about the 1947 Jefferson nickel. 1947 Jefferson nickel. The year was 1947. America was changing fast. The war was over. Factories were booming. New homes were being built across the country. Families were growing. The economy was expanding. And millions of Jefferson nickels were moving through American pockets every single day. Nobody thought about saving them. Nobody believed they would become collectible. They were simply money. A nickel could buy things. A nickel had purpose. So people spent them. Again and again. And that simple fact is exactly why collectors care about the 1947 Jefferson nickel today. Because while millions were produced, very few survived in truly exceptional condition. And that creates opportunity. When you first find a 1947 Jefferson nickel, it may not look impressive. The design is familiar. Jefferson appears on the front. Monticello appears on the back. Everything seems ordinary, but experienced collectors know better. They know that ordinary-looking coins sometimes hide extraordinary value. The first thing you should check is the mint mark. Turn the coin over. Look beside Monticello. Do you see a tiny D? A tiny S? Or no mint mark at all? That small letter tells you where the coin was struck. Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco. Each mint has its own story. Each mint produced different quantities. And collectors often pay close attention to those differences. But here's where things become interesting. The real money often isn't in the mint mark. It's in the grade. Think about this for a moment. Two people might own a 1947 Jefferson nickel. Same date, same design, same history. Yet one coin might be worth a few cents. The other could be worth hundreds. Why? Condition. One coin circulated heavily. It spent decades changing hands. It became scratched, worn, and damaged. The other coin somehow escaped. Maybe it was saved in a collection. Maybe it sat untouched in a drawer. Maybe someone put away and forgot about it. Whatever happened, it survived. And survival matters. Because collectors compete for quality. They always have. And they always will. Now let's talk about something Jefferson nickel collectors absolutely love. Full steps. If you watch the earlier parts of the series, you already know how important this designation can be. Look carefully at the reverse. Focus on the steps beneath Monticello. Can you see every line clearly? Are the steps complete? Sharp? Unbroken? If so, you may have something special. Most nickels from this period do not display perfect full steps. Weak strikes were common. Circulation was inevitable. As a result, finding a true full steps example can be surprisingly difficult. That's exactly why collectors pay premiums for them. A high-grade full steps 1947 Jefferson nickel can attract tremendous attention. Some examples have sold for hundreds. Others have sold for much more. And every year, finding elite examples becomes harder. Because once a coin loses those details, they're gone forever. But here's where the treasure hunt becomes even more exciting. Errors. Collectors love errors. Because errors represent mistakes. And mistakes create rarity. The mint produced millions of coins correctly. But the few that weren't struck perfectly? Those are often the coins that attract the most attention. Take a magnifying glass. Look closely at the date. Inspect Liberty. Study In God We Trust. Do you see any doubling? Any extra thickness? Any unusual shadows around the letters? Those signs could indicate a double die variety. Many double dies remain undiscovered by the people who own them. That's because most people never look closely enough. They glance at the date and move on. Collectors don't. Collectors investigate. Collectors search. Collectors know that tiny details can create major value. Then there are die cracks. These fascinating features appear when the mint steel dies begin to break down after striking thousands of coins. A crack forms in the die. That crack transfers to every coin struck afterward. Under magnification, these cracks appear as raised lines crossing the coin surface. Some are tiny, others are dramatic. Either way, collectors often find them fascinating. Because every crack tells a story. A story of pressure. A story of wear. A story of a die reaching the end of its working life. And then there are repunched mint marks. These varieties continue to attract attention from specialists. Years ago, mint marks were punched into dies by hand. Sometimes the punch was applied more than once. When the impressions didn't line up perfectly, a second image appeared. Today, collectors actively hunt for these varieties because they reveal a unique moment during the minting process. A moment that wasn't supposed to happen. And that's exactly what makes them special. Now imagine you're sorting through an old family collection. You find a 1947 Jefferson nickel. At first glance, it looks ordinary, but then you notice strong luster, sharp details, clear full steps, maybe even a collectible variety. Suddenly, that forgotten nickel becomes something entirely different. It becomes a discovery. And discoveries are what keep collectors searching. That's why the 1947 Jefferson nickel remains such an important coin. Millions were made. Millions disappeared. Millions wore down over time. But the finest survivors continue to stand out. And every year, they're becoming harder to find. Because no matter how many collectors want them, the supply never increases. Only the demand does. And that simple reality continues driving collector interest today. But if you think the 1947 Jefferson nickel is impressive, wait until you hear about the next coin. Because the 1948 Jefferson nickel hides a secret that many collectors completely overlook. And that overlooked detail has turned ordinary nickels into valuable treasures more times than you might imagine. To be continued in part 6. By now, you probably noticed something interesting. The most valuable coins aren't always the oldest. They're not always the rarest. And they're definitely not always the ones people expect. Sometimes the biggest treasures hide inside coins that millions of Americans have seen and ignored. That's exactly what makes the 1948 Jefferson nickel so fascinating. At first glance, it looks ordinary, almost boring. But collectors know something most people don't. Hidden among the millions of 1,948 nickels are examples that have sold for astonishing amounts of money. And the reason why might surprise you. Let's uncover the story. Hashtag 1948 Jefferson nickel. Imagine America in 1948. The country was thriving. Businesses were growing. Families were buying new homes. The economy was booming. The hardships of World War II were fading into memory. And across the nation, Jefferson nickels continued moving through everyday commerce. Millions were produced. Millions were spent. Millions disappeared into circulation. Nobody expected them to become valuable. After all, they were only nickels. But history has a funny way of changing the value of ordinary things. And the 1948 Jefferson nickel is a perfect example. The first thing you should know is that collectors don't simply look at the date. They look deeper, much deeper, because hidden beneath the surface are details that can dramatically affect value. The first step is checking the mint mark. Turn the coin over. Look carefully beside Monticello. Do you see a D, an S, or no mint mark? That tiny letter tells you where the coin was struck. Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco. Each mint produced different numbers of coins. Each mint created its own collecting challenges. And some mint mark combinations are considerably tougher to find in exceptional condition. But here's the secret. The real treasure often isn't the mint mark. It's the condition. Imagine two 1948 nickels sitting side by side. To most people, they appear identical. Same date, same design, same denomination. Yet, one might be worth only a small premium. The other could command hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Why? Because one survived. The other didn't. One spent decades in circulation. The details became worn. The surfaces became scratched. The luster disappeared. The second coin remained protected. It stayed sharp, clean, untouched. And collectors pay dearly for that difference. Because finding pristine survivors from 1948 isn't easy. Every year, fewer remain. And that shrinking supply continues driving demand. Now, let's talk about the feature that Jefferson nickel collectors obsess over. Full steps. If you followed this series, you already know these two words can completely change a coin's value. Look closely at the reverse. Focus on the steps beneath Monticello. Can you see every step clearly? Are the lines complete, sharp, uninterrupted? If the answer is yes, you may be looking at a full steps example. And that matters. A lot. Most 1948 nickels don't qualify. Weak strikes were common. Circulation were erased details. As a result, full steps examples are much scarcer than many people realize. Collectors building high-end Jefferson nickel sets aggressively pursue them. Competition can become intense. And intense competition often leads to surprising prices. Some elite full steps examples have sold for amounts that leave casual collectors speechless. All from a coin most people wouldn't even notice. But that's only part of the story. Because now we enter one of the most exciting areas of coin collecting. Errors. The hidden treasures of the minting world. Mistakes. Accidents. Unexpected variations. The very things collectors love. Take out a magnifying glass. Now inspect your 1948 nickel carefully. Look at the date. Study Liberty. Examine In God We Trust. Do you see doubling? Extra thickness? A second image beneath the letters? If so, you may have discovered a double die variety. Many double dies are subtle. They're easy to miss, which is why valuable examples continue hiding in collections today. Most people never look closely enough. Collectors do, and that's why they find treasures others overlook. Then come die cracks. These fascinating features occur when the mint steel dies begin wearing out. Tiny fractures form. Those fractures transfer onto the coins being struck. Under magnification, they appear as raised lines running across the design. Some are small, others are dramatic. Either way, they tell a story. A story about a die nearing the end of its life. A story frozen forever in metal. And collectors love stories, especially when those stories create rarity. Then there are die chips and die breaks. These occur when tiny pieces of the die break away. The result can be unusual raised areas appearing on the coin. Some collectors actively hunt these varieties because they represent a unique moment in the minting process. A moment that wasn't supposed to happen. And that's exactly why they're collectible. Now imagine this scenario. You're cleaning out an old family home. You find a dusty coin jar hidden in the back of a closet. Most people would dump the coins into a counting machine. But you decide to look. Among the change sits a 1948 Jefferson nickel. You inspect it carefully. The luster is strong. The details are sharp. The steps are complete. Maybe there's even a collectible variety. Suddenly, that forgotten nickel becomes something far more exciting than pocket change. It becomes a discovery. And discoveries are what keep collectors searching year after year. That's why the 1948 Jefferson nickel remains one of the most fascinating coins in the Jefferson series. Millions were made. Millions disappeared. But the finest survivors continue attracting attention. And every year they become harder to find. Because once they're damaged, lost, or destroyed, they're gone forever. But don't stop searching yet. Because the next coin on our list may be even more surprising. The 1953 Jefferson nickel has developed a reputation among collectors for reasons most people never expect. And hidden within that year are clues that could transform an ordinary nickel into a serious collector prize. To be continued in part 7. By now, you probably realize something most people never learn. The biggest treasures in coin collecting rarely announce themselves. They don't sparkle like gold. They don't look rare. And they certainly don't come with a warning label that says, "Don't spend me." Instead, they hide, quietly, patiently, waiting for someone who knows what to look for. And that's exactly why the 1953 Jefferson nickel has become one of the most fascinating coins in the series. At first glance, it looks ordinary, but collectors know better. Because hidden inside the story of a 1953 nickel is one of the most important lessons in all of coin collecting. Never judge a coin too quickly. Let's find out why. 1953 Jefferson nickel. The year was 1953. Dwight D. Eisenhower had just become president of the United States. Television sets were appearing in more American homes than ever before. The economy was booming. The country was optimistic. And across America, millions of Jefferson nickels were being spent every single day. Children carried them to candy stores. Workers used them at vending machines. Families spent them without a second thought. Nobody imagined that decades later collectors would be hunting the same coins. But that's exactly what happened. Today, the 1953 Jefferson nickel remains one of the most searched dates among Jefferson nickel enthusiasts. Not because it is impossibly rare, not because it contains silver, but because finding the right example can be surprisingly difficult. And difficulty creates opportunity. The first thing every collector checks is the mint mark. Turn the coin over. Look beside Monticello. Do you see a D, an S, or no mint mark at all? That tiny letter immediately changes the conversation. Because each mint produced coins with different characteristics. And one mint in particular continues attracting attention. San Francisco. The 1953 S. Jefferson nickel has become famous among collectors for a very specific reason. Weak strikes. Many examples from San Francisco show softer details than collectors would like. The design often lacks sharpness. Monticello may appear weak. Jefferson's hair may show less detail. The steps beneath Monticello may be incomplete, and that creates a problem. Collectors want quality. The mint didn't always provide it. As a result, sharply struck 1953 S nickels became much harder to find. And whenever something becomes harder to find, collectors start paying attention, very close attention. Imagine two identical 1953 S nickels. One has weak details. The other is sharp and fully struck. To most people, they're the same coin. To collectors, they are completely different. One might be common. The other might command a substantial premium. That's why experienced collectors never rush when examining a coin. They study every detail, every line, every surface, every step. And speaking of steps, It's time to discuss the feature that can completely transform the value of a Jefferson nickel. Full steps. By now you've heard the term several times, but its importance cannot be overstated. Look carefully at the reverse of your 1953 nickel. Focus on the staircase beneath Monticello. Can you see every step clearly? Are the lines uninterrupted, sharp, complete? If the answer is yes, you may be looking at something special, especially if the coin came from San Francisco. Because finding a 1953S with full steps is significantly more difficult than finding ordinary examples. Collectors know this. Registry set builders know this. Investors know this. And when one appears in high grade, competition can become intense. Auction prices have demonstrated this reality time and time again. A common example may be worth very little. An exceptional full steps example can be worth dramatically more. That's the power of rarity. But condition isn't the only thing collectors search for. The real treasure hunt begins when you start looking for errors. Errors are where ordinary coins become extraordinary. And the 1953 Jefferson nickel has produced some fascinating discoveries. Take out a magnifying glass. Now inspect the date carefully. Look at Liberty. Look at I in God We Trust. Do any letters appear doubled? Do you see unusual thickness? A second image? Tiny shadows around the design? If you do, you may have discovered a double die variety. Many collectors overlook these signs because they're often subtle. That's exactly why valuable examples continue hiding in old collections. Most people simply don't know what they're looking at. Collectors do, and that knowledge creates opportunity. Then come die cracks, one of the most fascinating mint-made features. A die crack occurs when the steel die begins to fracture after striking thousands and thousands of coins. The crack transfers onto every coin struck afterward. Under magnification, it appears as a raised line running across the design. Some are small, others are dramatic. Either way, they tell a story. A story about a die under enormous pressure. A story about a tool slowly breaking apart. A story permanently preserved in metal. And collectors love that. Then there are die chips and die breaks. These occur when tiny pieces of the die break away. The resulting coins can display unusual raised blobs or extra metal in unexpected locations. To most people, they look strange. To collectors, they look interesting. And interesting often means valuable. Now imagine you're searching through an old collection inherited from a relative. You find several Jefferson nickels. Most seem ordinary. Then one catches your attention. A 1953 S. Sharp details. Strong luster. Clear full steps. Maybe even a collectible error. Suddenly, that forgotten nickel becomes the most exciting coin in the box. That's what keeps collectors searching. The possibility. The mystery. The idea that treasure might be hiding in plain sight. And the 1953 Jefferson nickel captures that feeling perfectly. Millions were made. Millions circulated. But only a small number survive with the qualities collectors demand today. And every year, those survivors become harder to find because coins are lost, damaged, cleaned, destroyed. The supply keeps shrinking. Yet collector demand remains strong. That's why the hunt continues. That's why people still search through old jars and forgotten collections. And that's why you should never ignore a 1953 Jefferson nickel, because the next valuable discovery might already be sitting in your hands. But if you think the 1953 nickel is impressive, wait until you see what happens next. So far, we've uncovered hidden treasures inside some of the most overlooked Jefferson nickels ever produced. We've seen how tiny details can separate an ordinary 5-cent coin from a collector's prize. But now we're moving into a year that many people completely underestimate. A coin that quietly sits in old collections. A coin that rarely gets attention from casual collectors. Yet a coin that experts never ignore. Because hidden within the story of the 1954 Jefferson nickel are secrets that continue to reward those who take the time to look closer. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll never look at a 1954 nickel the same way again. 1954 Jefferson nickel. The year was 1954. America was in the middle of one of its greatest economic expansions. New highways stretched across the country. Suburban neighborhoods were growing rapidly. Television was becoming a centerpiece of family life. The nation was confident, optimistic, and every day, millions of Jefferson nickels changed hands from one American to another. Nobody thought about saving them. Nobody imagined they would become collectible. Why would they? They were simply nickels. Common, ordinary, everyday money. But history has a habit of turning ordinary objects into extraordinary treasures. And the 1954 Jefferson nickel is proof. The first thing you should do whenever you find one is check the mint mark. Turn the coin over. Look beside Monticello. Do you see a small D, an S, or no mint mark at all? That tiny letter tells an important story, because each mint struck coins differently. Each mint created unique collecting opportunities, and some mint mark combinations are significantly more desirable than others. But here's where things become interesting. Most people think rarity alone creates value. Collectors know that's not true. Condition is often even more important. Imagine two identical 1954 nickels. One spent decades in circulation. It was carried in pockets, dropped on sidewalks, used in vending machines. Its details gradually wore away. The second coin was saved, protected, forgotten inside a collection. Its luster remains intact. Its details remain sharp. Its surfaces remain clean. To most people, they're the same coin. To collectors, they're completely different. And that difference can mean hundreds of dollars. Sometimes even more. That's why experienced collectors examine every detail carefully. Because quality matters. And nowhere is that more obvious than with full steps. By now you probably heard that term several times. Full steps. For Jefferson nickel collectors, those words are almost magical. Look carefully at the reverse of your 1954 nickel. Focus on the staircase beneath Monticello. Can you see every step? Are the lines complete? Sharp? Unbroken? If they are, you may have discovered something special. Most nickels from this era don't display perfect full steps. Weak strikes were common. Circulation were erased details. As a result, true full steps examples became much scarcer over time, and scarcity creates demand. Today, collectors building elite Jefferson nickel sets aggressively compete for these coins, because finding one isn't easy, and every year it becomes harder. The supply keeps shrinking, but demand remains strong. That's the formula that drives collector value. But condition is only part of the story. The real excitement begins when errors enter the picture. Errors are one of the biggest reasons collectors search through old coin jars. They're unexpected, accidental, and often valuable. Take a magnifying glass. Now examine the date. Look carefully at Liberty. Study I in God we trust. Do you notice any doubling? Any extra thickness? Any unusual shadows around the letters? These signs could indicate a double die variety. Many double dies are subtle. They're easy to overlook. That's exactly why valuable examples continue hiding in collections today. Most people never inspect their coins closely enough. Collectors do, and that's why they find treasures others miss. Then there are repunched mint marks. These fascinating varieties remain favorites among specialists. Years ago, mint marks were punched into dies by hand. Sometimes the punch landed slightly off-center. The mint worker punched it again. The result? Two impressions. One mint mark sitting on top of another. Today, those tiny mistakes attract serious attention from collectors because they reveal something rare. A glimpse into the actual minting process. A moment when human error became permanent history. And that's exactly what makes them collectible. Then come die cracks. One of the most fascinating mint-made features. Every die has a lifespan. Eventually, after striking thousands upon thousands of coins, stress begins to take its toll. Small fractures appear. Those fractures transfer onto the coins, under magnification. They appear as raised lines running across the design. Some are tiny, others are dramatic. Either way, they tell a story. A story of machinery under pressure. A story of a die nearing the end of its useful life. A story frozen forever in metal. And collectors love stories, especially when those stories create rarity. Now imagine finding a 1954 Jefferson nickel in an old family collection. You almost ignore it. After all, it's just a nickel. But then you notice something unusual. Strong luster, sharp details, clear full steps, perhaps a double die, perhaps a repunched mint mark. Suddenly, that ordinary coin becomes extraordinary. That's the magic of coin collecting, the possibility, the mystery, the excitement of discovery, because you never know what you're holding until you look closer. And that's why collectors continue searching through boxes, jars, albums, and inherited collections every single day. They're looking for survivors, the coins everyone else missed, the coins that escape circulation, the coins that tell a story. And the 1954 Jefferson nickel tells a remarkable one. Millions were made, millions disappeared, but the finest examples remain highly desirable. And every year, they become harder to find, because no new 1954 nickels are being produced. The supply can only decrease, never increase, and that's exactly why collectors continue hunting them. But don't stop now, because the next coin on our list may surprise you even more. The 1957 Jefferson nickel looks incredibly common. In fact, most people wouldn't give it a second glance. But hidden among those ordinary nickels are examples that collectors aggressively pursue. And once you learn why, you'll never overlook a 1957 nickel again. To be continued in part 9. At this point in our journey, you've probably started looking at Jefferson nickels a little differently. That's exactly what happens to most collectors. The more they learn, the more they realize that valuable coins don't always stand out. Sometimes they're hiding in plain sight. Sometimes they're sitting in an old jar. Sometimes they're mixed in a pile of pocket change. And today's coin might be one of the best examples of that reality. Because the 1957 Jefferson nickel is one of the most underestimated coins in the entire Jefferson nickel series. Most people see it and move on. Collectors stop and look closer, because they know something most people don't. And today, you're about to learn that secret too. 1957 Jefferson nickel. The year was 1957. America was thriving. Rock and roll was exploding in popularity. Televisions filled living rooms across the nation. New cars rolled off assembly lines every day. The economy was strong. Life was moving fast. And somewhere in that fast-moving world, millions of Jefferson nickels entered circulation. Nobody thought they were special. Why would they? They were just nickels. Small change. Everyday money. People spent them at diners, movie theaters, gas stations, vending machines. They passed from one hand to another without anyone paying attention. Yet decades later, collectors would search for those same coins. Not all of them. Only the right ones. And that's where the treasure hunt begins. The first thing every collector checks is the mint mark. Turn your 1957 nickel over. Look beside Monticello. Do you see a D? Or no mint mark from Philadelphia? That tiny detail matters, because different mints often produce coins with different characteristics. Some strikes were stronger. Some were weaker. Some varieties appeared at one mint, but not another. And understanding those differences is often the first step toward finding something valuable. But here's where things get interesting. The real story isn't about the mint mark. It's about survival. Think about how many 1957 nickels were produced. Hundreds of millions. Now think about how many survived in pristine condition. The answer is much smaller than most people realize. Most nickels were heavily circulated. They were dropped, scratched, worn down through years of use. As a result, finding a truly exceptional survivor has become increasingly difficult, and difficulty creates demand. Imagine two 1957 nickels. One is worn smooth from decades of circulation. The other still shines with original mint luster. The details remain sharp. The surfaces remain clean. The design appears almost untouched. To most people, they're both worth 5 cents. To collectors, the difference can be enormous. That's why condition is everything. And nowhere is that more obvious than with full steps. If you followed the series from the beginning, you already know how important full steps can be. But for the 1957 Jefferson nickel, they are especially important. Look carefully at Monticello on the reverse. Focus on the steps beneath the building. Can you see every line clearly? Are the steps complete? Sharp? Unbroken? If they are, congratulations. You found one of the most desirable characteristics in the Jefferson nickel series. Most 1957 nickels do not display perfect full steps. Weak strikes in circulation will usually remove those details. That's why collectors compete aggressively for examples that do. A high-grade full steps 1957 nickel can attract remarkable attention and sometimes remarkable prices. But now we arrive at the part collectors love most: errors, the hidden treasures of the coin world. Because sometimes the most valuable coins are the ones the mint didn't intend to create. Take out a magnifying glass. Look closely at the date. Study Liberty. Examine In God We Trust. Do any letters appear doubled? Do you notice extra thickness? A shadow-like second image? These signs could indicate a double die variety. Many double dies are subtle. Very subtle. In fact, most people never notice them. That's why valuable examples continue hiding in collections across America. Collectors understand that the smallest details often produce the biggest rewards. And that's exactly why they look so carefully. Then there are die cracks, one of the most fascinating mint-made features. After striking thousands of coins, a die begins to wear out. Tiny fractures develop. Those fractures transfer directly onto the coins. Under magnification, they appear as raised lines crossing the design. Some are barely noticeable. Others are dramatic. Either way, they tell a story. A story of stress. A story of wear. A story of a die approaching the end of its life. And collectors love that connection to the minting process. Then come die chips and die breaks. These occur when pieces of the die actually break away. The resulting coins can display unusual raised areas where metal flowed into the missing space. Some collectors actively search for these varieties because they're unique. They're different, and different often means valuable. Now imagine you're sorting through an old cigar box filled with coins. Most appear ordinary. Most seem unimportant. Then you find a 1957 Jefferson nickel. You inspect it carefully. Strong luster. Sharp details. Clear full steps, maybe even a collectible variety. Suddenly, that overlooked nickel becomes the most exciting coin in the box. That's why collectors keep searching. Not because every coin is valuable, but because every coin has potential. And sometimes potential turns into discovery. The 1957 Jefferson nickel perfectly represents that idea. Millions were produced. Millions circulated. But only a small percentage survive with the qualities collectors want today. And every year, those survivors become harder to find. The supply keeps shrinking, yet demand remains strong. That's a formula that keeps collectors hunting. That's why old collections continue producing surprises. And that's why you should never ignore a 1957 Jefferson nickel. Because the next great discovery might already be waiting for you. But now we come to the final coin in our countdown. A coin that many collectors consider one of the most misunderstood Jefferson nickels ever produced. The 1959 Jefferson nickel. A coin that looks ordinary, acts ordinary, and yet hides secrets that continue fascinating collectors to this day. And what we're about to uncover may completely change the way you look at pocket change forever. To be continued in part 10. We've reached the final coin in our countdown. And if you followed this journey from a 1939 Jefferson nickel all the way to now, you've already discovered something important. The most valuable coins aren't always the oldest. They aren't always the rarest. And they certainly aren't always the ones people expect. Sometimes the biggest treasures hide inside the coins everyone ignores. The coins people spend without thinking. The coins buried inside jars, drawers, and forgotten collections. And that brings us to the final coin on our list. A coin that many collectors overlook for years. A coin that still surprises people today. A coin that proves why every nickel deserves a second look. This is a story of the 1959 Jefferson nickel. 1959 Jefferson nickel. Imagine America in 1959. The country was entering a new decade. Televisions filled living rooms across the nation. New highways connected cities from coast to coast. The economy was strong. The future looked bright. And somewhere in all that progress, millions upon millions of Jefferson nickels rolled out of the United States Mint. Nobody thought they were special. Nobody carefully stored them away. Nobody imagined collectors would one day hunt for them. Why would they? They were ordinary nickels. Everyday money. They bought candy, sodas, newspapers, bus fares. They moved through circulation exactly as intended. Yet decades later, collectors began noticing something interesting. The finest examples were becoming surprisingly difficult to find. And that's where the story begins. The first thing every collector checks on a 1959 Jefferson nickel is the mint mark. Flip the coin over. Look beside Monticello. Do you see a D? Or no mint mark from Philadelphia? That tiny detail immediately tells part of the coin story. But unlike some earlier dates, the real excitement often comes from something else. Condition. Because condition is everything. Think about it. Hundreds of millions of 1959 nickels entered circulation. Most were spent repeatedly. Most became worn. Most suffered scratches, nicks, and damage. But a few survived untouched. A few escaped circulation. A few remained exactly as they appeared when they left the mint. Those survivors are the coins collectors dream about finding. Imagine opening an old collection and discovering a 1959 nickel that still shines with original mint luster. The surfaces are clean. The details are sharp. Jefferson's portrait looks crisp. Monticello appears strong and complete. Suddenly, what looked like an ordinary nickel becomes something entirely different, because quality is rare, and rarity creates value. But now we arrive at the feature that has defined Jefferson nickel collecting for generations. Full steps. If you've watched every part of the series, you already know what's coming. Look closely at the reverse. Focus on the staircase beneath Monticello. Can you see every step clearly? Are the lines complete? Sharp? Unbroken? If they are, you may have found one of the most desirable qualities in the entire Jefferson nickel series. Most 1959 nickels do not display perfect full steps. Weak strikes often prevented complete details from appearing. Circulation were erased many examples that did. As a result, genuine full steps coins remain highly desirable. Collectors building registry quality sets actively compete for them. Auction houses recognize them. Investors pursue them. And the best examples can command astonishing premiums. Some high-grade full steps 1959 nickels have sold for hundreds and even, not because it's ancient, but because it's rare in the condition collectors want. That's the power of quality. But the story doesn't stop there. Why? Because they're mistakes. And mistakes create rarity. Many double dies remain hidden inside old collections because people simply don't know what they're looking at. Collectors do. That's why they search. That's why they inspect every coin carefully. Because one small detail can completely change the value of a coin. Then come die cracks. One of the most fascinating mint-made features. Every die experiences stress. Every die wears out. Eventually, tiny fractures begin forming. Those fractures transfer directly onto the coins being struck. Under magnification, they appear as raised lines crossing the design. Some are subtle. Others are dramatic. Either way, they tell a story. A story about the minting process. A story about machinery under pressure. A story permanently preserved in metal. And collectors love stories, especially when those stories make a coin unique. Then there are die chips and die breaks. Small pieces of the die break away. The resulting coins display unusual raised areas where metal flowed into the missing space. Some collectors actively search for these varieties because they represent moments that were never supposed to happen. Accidents, imperfections, unexpected treasures. And that's exactly why they remain so popular. Now imagine you're sorting through an old jar of coins. Most are modern. Most seem ordinary. Then you find a 1959 Jefferson nickel. You almost toss it aside, but instead, you look closer. You check the mint mark. You check the condition. You inspect the steps. You search for errors. And suddenly, what appeared ordinary becomes exciting. Because that's how discoveries happen. One coin at a time. One detail at a time. One careful inspection at a time. And that's the lesson of the 1959 Jefferson nickel. Never assume, never overlook, never spend a coin before checking it. Because hidden among millions of ordinary nickels are few extraordinary survivors. And those survivors continue rewarding collectors who take the time to look. Final outro. So there you have it. From the 1939 Jefferson nickel all the way to the 1959 Jefferson nickel, we've uncovered decades of history, rare varieties, full steps examples, double dies, die cracks, mint mark secrets, and collector treasures. Remember these 4 checks every time you find an old Jefferson nickel. Check the date, check the mint mark, check the steps, check for errors. Those 4 simple checks could mean the difference between a common nickel and a valuable collector coin. Because the next hidden treasure won't announce itself. It won't glow. It won't look expensive. It will look ordinary. And that's exactly why everyone else will miss it. Thank you for watching Old Coin Empire. If you enjoyed this coin hunt, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And remember, your next valuable coin may already be sitting in your pocket right now.